Good morning, Year 7. I hope everybody is well and that you're having a fantastic week so far. So this is now week 12, part 2 of creating your final piece. Now, last lesson, I asked you to sketch out something like this. So you will have sketched out a landscape onto an A4 page in your book or on some thick card or paper. There were some fantastic sketches. A few people need to just go and have a look and just double check they've got enough details and they've included some perspective and they've got the different layers of the landscape. So they need to make sure they've got a foreground, a midground drawn, the background, and then the sky. And you need to include at least a quick sketch of some of those areas. So as you can see now, my design is sketched out. There's no specific detail. There's some rough sketched lines. I've attempted some mark making very loosely and I've pressed softly on my pencil. This is now the stage that you should be up to. If you're not at this stage, you'll need to play catch up today and you'll need to re-sketch out something like this. You can see I included my perspective point there as well. Just for when I'm painting, it will help me bring it together. So the next step now is the painting step. So the best thing to do before you start painting, hopefully you can get hold of some watercolours or some other paints at home. If not, you can use the tea stain method and you can apply tea stain or coffee stain with a sponge. You could do it with an old makeup brush, a paintbrush. You could use a straw. But I'm going to show you my desk setup. So next to me, I've got some water for my paints. I've got standard watercolour set. You can pick up the half sets with 8 to 12 paints in for about £3 on Amazon. So I'll put the link in if anyone does want to purchase some of these. I've got a couple of brushes. I've also got some sponges, I've got some paper and some just other stationary household objects because I'm going to use these for mark making in my portrait. I've also got a pencil and a rubber in case I need to add any bits in. I'm going to use my lid of my paints to mix. I've got some scrap paper and then I've got some kitchen roll just in case I need to dab off any of my excess materials. Or if I make a mistake, I can use the kitchen roll to rub out some of the watercolour. The next thing that you'll need in front of you, so it could be on your phone or your computer, is the photos that you collected or the images you collected off the internet that you used as inspiration. So you can see I've collected some of Hockney's images that I discussed with you last week. This was an image that I took myself of the sky because I particularly like the sunset with the clouds. And then I found this mountain image off the internet as well. So it's really important that you do have some inspiration in front of you that you can take ideas from. Not to copy one solid image, but what you should have done when you sketched out your design was you should have looked at these images you collected and taken elements of them that you liked to help create your design. So I'll be working from this today. The next step is I'm going to show you some techniques on applying watercolour or paint onto your page. Now I'm going to show you it with coffee stain and tea stain and I'm going to show you it with paint in case you don't have paint at home or you can't get hold of any. The first thing that I'm going to consider before I start painting is the colours that I want to use in my piece. The piece is inspired by the artist we've been looking at, David Hockney, who uses lots of really, really bright and warm tones in his work. If you look closely, you can see he also uses some modern and abstract colours such as blues, purples and reds in his pieces as well. So this is something that you consider when completing your painting. It should be uplifting. It should really represent an enjoyable summer-like scene. It is important that you look closely at the different tones that have been created using mark making. Consider the light and dark shades where the tones blend together, such as here, where you've got like a reddy brown field with hints of orange that then fades into the yellow as if it's just been freshly mown land. So this is something that you need to consider. You need to think about what approach you would like to take. So today you are just going to be painting the foreground at the front of the painting here. So you are just going to paint either a quarter or a third of your page. If you're going to get distracted by the rest of the painting, get some paper and cover it like so. The reason I'm asking you to just do the foreground is because sometimes we are in a habit of just wanting to get a piece of work done and just to finish it. But to do this task properly, to show off your best skills that you've learned this term, it is important that you just focus on one area today. And each lesson, I will show you how to do each section and how to make them blend together carefully. So just focus on the foreground, the bottom bit of your painting today. In the next lesson, we'll work on the midground, and then your final lesson, you will work on the background and the sky of your painting. So I've covered mine, it's just to show you. I'm ready to go. I've got my water, I've got my palette, I've got some other items such as sponges that I can work on to create my mark making. It might be handy as well to have your book in front of you so you can look at the other mark making techniques that you practiced last week. In front of me, I've just got my book from the work that we did last week on mark making. So I've got that clearly in front of me and I can refer to that and some of the mark making and some of the techniques with the blending in order to support you through today's lesson. So have that handy, refer to it as and when you need to remind yourself of some of the textures and techniques that you can create, such as pointillism, using lines in a specific way, directional mark making. You could use a sponge to create texture in the grass. Cross hatching, where you overlap the lines in a diagonal. I will leave it up to you. Okay, I'm now going to get started. I'm actually going to remove this piece of paper because I don't feel like I need it when working. So in order to begin painting, it is really important that you prepare your materials before you get started. You've got your water, and then you've got your palette and your mixing lid. So what I always do when I get started is I see how many shades of the colour that I can make that I want to use. So I'm going to focus on this landscape to get me started on the foreground because I really like the way that this landscape has got the greenery at the front just here where the leaves are kind of jutting out. So I'm going to use that as inspiration for mine. So what I tend to do is mix up as many greens as I can on my extra lid, add in a bit of water as I go, creating as many shades of green to make lighter, adding some white to my green to make a green darker, adding a bit of black to my green. So you can spend a couple of minutes just preparing before you're ready to start. Then I'm going to start working lightly first. It's really important when you add paint that you work lightly and you don't just add a really dark colour because it's harder to remove it. Then I'm just going to start using mark making, very loose brush strokes, adding some more water as I go and building up in circular motions the texture in my painting to create atmosphere and also to create movement in the greenery that I am aiming to paint. So as you can see, I've done that very quickly. And to build up the base layer, that is something that you can do very quickly. But it's when you start to add the details, you will need to spend a lot more time on this. So the other thing that you need to consider is anything that is in the foreground at the very front here will be larger than anything that goes further away from you in the painting. So say I was drawing these leaves here, they would need to be drawn much larger and in a lot more detail than anything in the distance. So that's something that I'm going to consider. Because I'm starting with the foreground, I can draw things a little bit larger because they're closest to me. So I'm now going to start focusing on these leaves. I'm not going to draw them exactly the same as the ones here, but I'm going to take great inspiration from them. So I'm going to just start by carefully sketching out with the paintbrush, being really quick and free, some large block shapes that will represent these leaves. And then as they go further away from the page, they're going to get a little bit smaller, like so. So if they're at the front in the foreground, they're going to be much larger than the ones that are going further away towards the midground of the painting. So you need to constantly be looking at the reference images, the images that you've collected, in order to give you some guide. I'm now going to start to think a bit more about how I'm going to apply the detail to these. And I've decided that I'm going to use a sponge. I've just got an old bit of sponge. And I'm going to add some of the darker tones using a dark green and my sponge, because I think that the sponge will create some lovely texture, like here underneath the leaves, where they've got the green dark shadows. So I'm just going to do that, dab that carefully, very, very delicately, to create some texture underneath. And as you can see, they've just got the texture, the artist that's done this painting has just got the green underneath on one side. This creates a reflection on one side and shows that it's coming out the one angle of the piece. So I'm just going to dab carefully. Might need to add some more paint. Watercolour should be quite watery, but if you are using different materials like a sponge, you might need to add a little bit of extra paint to it. So I'm just going to start to build up this texture as a base layer. I'm just dabbing using the sponge to create that texture. So as you can see, it's already taken me 5 minutes or so just to do this one section, and I only want you to do the whole bottom layer today, up to all the way across. So that is one step there for you. The next thing is you might consider having some textured grass or leaves or a path in your foreground. So you could then go in with a paintbrush and again work out your shades, and then you could start to refine and add some details. Holding your paintbrush near the end like so and being loose with it will help create careful and quick detailing in your piece. If you need to dab off your brush at all because it's too wet, you can always just dab it on here or just do this in your palette. Because sometimes when you're drawing the outline, you do need a bit more paint on it, but work on the end of the brush really loosely. This task is all about creating and showing your mark making skills. So I want it to be a little bit abstract. I want it to have texture. So that is what I want you to get on with today. I want you to just paint the whole bottom section all the way along of your painting, really, really looking at details in your reference images and taking your own ideas as well. And then hopefully by the end, you should have a whole painted row of your landscape. Hopefully that is clear, the task today. You don't need to do a connect question. I just want you to get straight on with this final piece to show your learning today. Please take care. Please don't rush this task. The best results will be those that have really looked closely at their reference images, taken on board the techniques that you've learned, used the mark making that you've looked at previously, and started to put this into practice now. If you don't have watercolours, I'm going to really quickly show you how to use some other items. So I've got some soy sauce. I've got a red wine vinegar, which you might have in the cupboard. And I've also got some tea brew in there as well. So again, you can use paintbrushes. You could use an old makeup brush, a sponge, a cloth, whatever you can get your hands on in the house. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to just do a quick tutorial of the other side of my painting now, just to show you if you were to use those ingredients. So soy sauce works really well because it's really dark. and that can create the darker greens, the darker tones. So I'm just going to apply it on in some mark-making way. So soy sauce is a great one. It works quite thickly, which is good, and you can obviously lighten it up by adding water to it and spreading it. Another one, red wine vinegar. It does create like a lighter brown there. Again, it works similarly to watercolour. You can add water, you can add a bit more of it. You could try and mix these together as well. If I mix a bit of soy sauce and the red wine vinegar, it creates an in the middle kind of texture as well. Just spilt some of my soy sauce there. But it creates a really nice earthly kind of brown. And then obviously the tea stain, the longer you leave the tea bag, the more effect you're going to kind of have and the darker it'll be. So you've created some browns. If you want to try and create some other colours, things like raspberries, berries, also beetroot, you can just leave on the stove stewing if you've got some left over. Those things all work really well. If you want to create some more brighter colours, raspberries work really, really well to create reds. To create green tones, you could leave some broccoli steaming or some other vegetables. Hopefully that is clear, but it does work in the same way. If you can't access any of these things, you're welcome to use coloured pencils. However, please be aware that this is your final assessment piece of the year. So I would highly recommend that you do get hold of some of these materials if you can. And I will put the link to the really cheap watercolour palettes that we use in school on here as well. And it's really great then because you can use them all the way through school. Take care, good luck with part 1 of the task, and I will catch up with you next week, year 7, for part 2. Have a great week, bye.